So we'll look at a couple examples using arrays. So first example, we're just going to create an integer array, and we want the values in the array to come from user entry. So there'll be a set of user entered scores that we obtain with a sentinel loop, so the user can stop by entering a negative score. And then we will set up another method to find the average of those scores, and we'll do this manually, so we won't use any functions. We'll just go through the loop, add up the scores, and then divide by the total. And then we'll output the scores along with their average. So there's a couple of things about arrays that we'll run into as we go. To start, we'll just assume that there are between 1 and 5 scores. So the user always enters at least one number and does not enter more than 5. Okay. And then I'll modify that to capture the case where the user doesn't enter a score at all, and also to capture larger user entry options up to whatever the user enters. Okay. So we'll jump over to Eclipse for a minute and set up some of the syntax, including a new Java project for chapter 7. Finish, no module. And then in here, we'll create a new class. We'll call it score array. The headers, date, and this program will create an integer array, use an integer array to store user input scores, then find an output. Find the average. Then let's just say output. Then we'll output those scores along with their average. Okay, and if we think about sort of what we want main to look like, and again, a couple people have this has come up a few times that main, we want it to sort of contain the logic that you can look at and just see what's going on by looking at main. So in main, I'm going to skip a few lines here in case we need to add some code in, and then we want to get the scores. And I want to leave this parameter thing option open for me for a second. And then we want to calculate the average. And again, I'm not entirely sure what I want to do for parameters here, so I'm going to kind of leave that open. And then I want to output the results. And I do know what I want to include here. I want to include sort of the array and how many values we have, the count. So I'm going to just kind of put this underneath here, the count and the array of values. Okay, so what we're going to take advantage of here is that when I create the array, it has a fixed size. And so in this example, because we know they're entering between 1 and 5 scores, our integer array will have five slots in it. And Java will initially set them all to 0. So in order for us to know how many scores the user has entered, we can't base it on the number of numbers in the integer array, because 0 could be one of the scores the user enters, and we won't know whether it was the 0 from the default or the 0 that the student or the person entered. So what we'll do is we'll set up the array in main. Let's call it score array. And that'll be our array that we're setting up, and it'll contain all zeros, 5 of them. And then so when we get scores, we will send in this score array to get the scores, and we will add the new scores to that array. So the array, as we update it, the name points to the array actually. So if we update the things in the array, in the method, they will change. We haven't changed the name pointing to the array. So the method itself can modify this without returning it, which is good because then we can return how many things that we've added, the count. And then when we calculate the average, we will need to send that score array as well as the count. And same 2 things here, the score array and the count will both get sent to outputting the results. And this calculating average, let's have this go ahead and return the average here. Then we can send a 3rd thing here, which would be the average. And again, you might think, oh, well, we don't need to send the count then, but we still would need this count because we need to be able to know when the user has entered a 0 and we want to count it, or when the 0 is just the default and we don't want to count it. Okay, let's go over to Eclipse, and once we have this pseudocode, it's not going to be that much work to sort of figure out what the actual code should look like. So here in main, we will set up an integer array. Okay, so we'll set up integer array. We're calling it that's a little confusing. The name of the class is score array. And I want to name my array score array. So that's confusing to me. My guess there is let's rename the class. Let's call it array practice. Average, just scores. And then let's save it. It's not gonna like, let's just start over. It doesn't like that I'm changing the name here because it's saved as a score average. So we'll just leave it as score array. And I'll change the name of this to, well, we'll just use the same name, score array with a lowercase, and you will understand that that's not the smartest thing to do in the future. Okay, so integer array with the 2 brackets, that tells us it's an array. Score array equals new integer array, and I have to tell it how big it is. And so we're going to have up to 5 entries. Okay. And then we want to call the method get scores, and then we want it to return an integer of how many scores we got. So integer count equals call the method get scores. I can go down here and define this method. Public static integer get scores. And we want to send this integer array, score array in here. So I want to say score array as a parameter. And then in here I need to accept an integer array. And we'll just call it scores. I like to use the word array when I have an array just because it helps me distinguish between I just have a single value or I have a set of values. So I like to say it's a score array. It might be a little bit redundant, but it helps us understand. So then we need a return statement here, and for now I'll just return -1. And I might actually just go through and do all the logic, because the other bit of logic is to calculate the average. It gets the score array and the count and returns an average. So I could just set that up in main. Again, integer average equals calculate average. We're going to pass in the score array and the count. And then I can set up that method header down here. Or calculate average. And again, it has an integer array called, I could rename it here if I wanted, but I'll just use this consistency and use the same name, score array, and it has an integer. I'll just call it count. And then it's expecting to return an integer as well. So again, we'll return -1. And we have one more function to call, which is output results. And it sends all three of these parameters, score array, count, and the average. And then I need to create that method, or at least the method header. And again, the three parameters, the integer array, score average, or score array, the integer count, and the integer average. And again, I'm just using the same names. We're just going with a small function here. Okay, so why do this? Well, it's because I've already set up the pseudocode, and I know the way I set the pseudocode up, that once this sort of logic is established, now our job becomes writing each of these individual methods. And this allows me to sort of check that my logic, my passing of parameters, etc. logic is strong. And that actually this is sort of the hard work of computer science, is writing main in a way that describes what's going on in the program without doing the whole program. So main is calling these other methods to do what needs to be done. Okay, so now get scores. We could describe up here, if we wanted to, what this method does. We're going to continue to get another score from the user. Or another way of saying that is to continue to get user entered score into an array. Continue to, how about put user entered scores into an array until user enters negative number. And I'll put here, they could also stop, or we could say a precondition, user will enter between 1 and 5 values. And I've just predicted an issue going into the next expansion of this problem was, no, I think it can be done. Okay, what happens when they enter more than 5 values? We need to increase the size of the integer array, and that essentially means taking the name and pointing it somewhere else. I have worries that that might not work in here, but that's the next video, so it's fine. Okay, so in this loop, we're going to need a prompt. So let's tell the user, what's that prompt going to say. Enter a score, negative value to quit. And I probably should tell the user, because we're assuming that the user will enter integers, continue to put user entered, I'm going to put the word integers here. Integers. So enter, and we'll change this to enter an integer score. Negative value to quit. And then we'll say, I'm going to need to keep track of how many scores the user has entered. So I'm going to set up an integer count, start off with it equaling 0. For now, I'm not going to worry about that they entered a non-integer. I'm going to only worry about that they entered up to 5 integers. So we'll say while we need 2 things to happen, the count is less than or equal to 5, and they haven't entered a negative score. So well, we didn't write anything down for the score yet. So I'm going to say here score is greater than or equal to 0. But notice I don't have a score yet, so that's problematic. So how do we get our first score? Let's call a method for that. So let's go integer score equals get score. The reason I want to call a method here is that I want to check and return an actual integer instead of, if they enter something else, I want them to get another score. So if I'm going to use this function get score, I'm actually going to take this prompt out of get scores, plural, and move it into get score singular. So I'll cut it out of here and leave those errors alone. We'll come right below this guy and we'll define a new function, public static int get score. No parameters. It's returning an integer, so I'll return -1. Oh, and in here, let's define the prompt. And now we'll make it robust. So we'll say while first we need to get the input first. We have a prompt, so we need a console. We need a scanner. So we'll go scanner console equals new scanner system.in. And they're going to want me to import something. Maybe I just use Eclipse. Let Eclipse do that for me. So that should have done my import statement. Import java.utility.scanner. Perfect. Okay. So then we can say while console is one of the look ahead methods, has next int. No, if it does not have another integer, then we'll take console.next to read out whatever it does have, and then we'll print the prompt again. You know, and that might feel redundant, but it's really not. We need it to happen twice. We need it initially, so they'll enter something in. And then, you know, maybe it makes more sense to put the scanner above the prompt, just in the logic, because why would you prompt before you have a scanner? So we have the scanner, we do the prompt. If what they enter is not an integer, advance the console, advance the scanner, and then get another prompt. So here I'm not redefining it. I'm actually printing it here. System.out.print. And I want to print the prompt here. So there is a little redundancy in what I did. Sorry. And actually up here, I also need to print the prompt. System. Let's put a colon and a space. We need to tell the user that that input is invalid. So before we get the next thing, we'll say invalid input. Please try again. And I also feel like it wouldn't hurt in front of this to have a print line statement. Because if this is just a print, that prompt's going to print. If it's fine, if it's an integer, then we're just done, and we're going to return that integer. So as soon as they enter an integer, we'll just return it. Console.next integer. Notice this is not checking whether it's negative. It's just making sure they entered an integer. And then back here, that integer gets returned, and while that count is less than or equal to 5 and the score is positive, we're going to increase the count by 1, and we're going to put that score, let's not increase the count yet. First, let's put the score in the score list. So we've got our score array, bracket count, that will be 1 less than the actual count is, and so that will match with the index. And we want to set that equal to the score. And we'll increase the count. And I guess we only need to do this until the count, let's see, count, if the count is 5, we don't want this to run then. So we only want to do this while the count is less than 5. And then on the 5th time, it will go in here, it will update the array, and then increase the count, and then it won't run again. And then here, what we want to return is the count now. Okay, so we've got quite a bit of code. I wrote 2 methods, one that gets a single score. You know, and this type of method is something we should have written before. It's making a robust input. The second method was to put the score that I got into the array. And really what I'm being careful of here is that the score either be positive and that we haven't had too many yet. So we want to run it, but before I run it, I want to just put some tests in here. So what I want to do here is just put a couple of print statements, system.out.println. Let's print the count. And let's go with get score, let's see, score array dot toPrint, toString. So this toString method I want to print. So I'm going to go system.out println. And that's going to print a user-friendly version of the list, so, or of the array. And these arrays, you know, you can think of them as lists, but we want to kind of, because in Python we just had lists. In Java we're going to have arrays here in chapter 7, and then when we go in the next quarter we're going to have lists. And the two things are different in how they're stored and how we access the data. So if I have a picture of that here, I don't, but maybe I'll draw it on over here. First, let's run this and see what it looks like, and then we'll come back and talk about the difference between sort of what is an array that we're dealing with right now and what will be a list that we're going to look at later. Okay, so we should be able to run this. I'm going to enter in, let's enter in errors exist. So let's see where they are. Semicolon. That's a nice little error. Fix. Okay. So we'll run this guy. Oh, it's in the console waiting for me to enter input, I'm assuming. Enter an integer. So let's go with 80. So there's a problem there. So you know, it's stopped. And then also my toString method just printed the where the array is. It didn't print the array. Let's take this out. Let me run this again. Something's wrong with my input, so that's okay. We're going to figure that out in a second. Again, it's printing the address of my array. I understand why. Let's see, dot to string. Oh, maybe because string. Maybe because I didn't have the parentheses there. No, not sure why. Okay, but it's only letting me enter in one value, so let's go figure that out. While the count is less than 0, less than 5, and the score is greater than 0. So score was 80, count was 0. Oh, I never got another score. So in this loop, I need to then update the score, get score. So we have to prime the loop, which we do up here by getting a score and setting the count equal to 0. And then we have to, you know, make the updates in the loop variable, which is getting another score and updating the count. So now let's run it and see what happens. It's still gonna have an issue with this print statement. So we'll go 80, 90, and let's go 70. Let's go 75. Now we want to quit, so -5. So it printed the 3 values, 80, 90, and 75. So count is right. Somehow my print statement's not right. Let's run that again, see what happens. 80, 90, and 100. -9. Again, 3 values, not printing the array correctly. Let's do a manual loop here. For integer I equals 0. Ooh, what happened? My computer is freezing, so I'm going to pause. Okay, so my Eclipse crashed, so I was doing something weird with my toString method. So I'm just going to do that manually, and I want to run a loop. So for integer index I equals 0, I strictly less than 5. And what we're going to do is I'm going to print the entire array so you can see not just the 3 values that I enter, but the default values that are also existing there. So we'll do system dot out, and for now let's just do a print line with score array bracket I. And this should print the scores followed by however many scores I did not enter. Up to 5 will be zeros. So we'll try this again. So if I enter 3 scores, that'll be 2 scores behind it. So we're going to go 80, and then 90, and then 75, and then -9 or -1, whatever. I entered 3 values. It stored 80, 90, and 75, yay. And then the 2 zeros are my default. So this is why I wanted a count, because I can say for I equals 0, I less than count, and it tells me how long my actual array, or how many actual values I have, and so when I should stop, so I don't print those extra zeros out. So if I go 80 and then 90 and then 75, and then I enter a negative number, a couple things. The negative number didn't get put in my array, which is good. And now my loop stops. It only prints the 3 items. So that's why I needed a count. Okay, so we'll keep, maybe we'll keep this loop for a minute. I don't really need it, actually. We don't need it. And we don't need this print line with the count. So we got our scores. We need to calculate the average. So calculating the average is down here. It gets the array and the count. So we know it also, we can assume that the count, precondition here is that the count is between 1 and 5. So that assumption means it helps me not divide by 0. So we can just say for integer I starting at 0, I less than the count. So the reason I'm starting at 0 is I want I to line up with the indexing in the array. So the first index in the array is 0, and so I go up to 1 less than the count. Notice I don't want to use score array.length. The length of the score array is 5, always in this problem. So if I do that, then I'll be adding in scores that aren't existing, the 0 scores, the default scores. Okay, and then we need here the average, or the sum. So we'll create an integer, let's call it total. Start it off at 0. That total is going to be adding up each time. So we're going to say total equals total plus, I want to go score array bracket I. And again, I could use total plus equals score array bracket I, but I just want to spell that out. And then what we would be returning would be, I guess it's not an integer, is it? Because an average is going to be a double. So I need to change the integer value here to double. And I need to change that back up here. My average is no longer an integer, it's actually a double. And then in here, I'm passing average, so that created an error in output results. So that's one problem with defining all these functions first, but not too hard to fix that. Okay, so now what I want to return is the total. Let's not make, so again, if I do this total divided by count, that is going to be integer division because both the total and the count are integers. So if I do 5 divided by 3, it's going to return 1. So I need to change this total up here to double. And just so it's clear, I might put this as double, 0.0. So now when I return total divided by count, it's going to take the total, that's going to be double division and return the actual value. All right, and then, so that's our calculating our average. And notice the difference in here is that we're going up to count. That's why I need that count. It tells me how many numbers I have. We're adding them up, and then we're dividing it out to return the average. Double check that it's working. We put a print statement in main. Right below here, system.out.print line average. And I'll just enter 2 scores, 80 and 90. Their average should be 85. So 80, 90, -1. The average is 85. Perfect. Take that print statement out. And we have one more method, output results. So I want to make a sentence here, and I want to say, you know, for the scores, and then list the scores. But when I list the scores, I'm going to run into a fence post problem, because if you think about sort of listing some scores here, what do I want the output to look like? So I want it to say something like, you know, the average of the scores um, 80, 82, and 90 is whatever the average is. So this is a loop. Maybe let's list a few more. 80, 80, 80, 70, and 90. So that's having 5 scores. I guess it's a problem if there's only one. It's a little harder than I initially thought it was going to be. So maybe we won't do that right now. For now, I just want to show how to do this. So I will say, we'll put our output like this instead. Scores, and we'll list them all. 80. 80, 90, 80, 90, 70. So we'll enter them like this. So and then we'll just have a thing down here that says average, and this is the average. In other words, I'm not going to do a fence post problem, but if there's only one score, we'll just enter it by itself. So the last score will not have a comma with it. So maybe it's a little bit of a fence post problem. Okay. Let's go back to our code. Yeah, so in our output results, we want to run a loop. I want to say for integer I equals 0, I less than count minus 1. I plus plus. So now if you only have one score, this loop won't print anything. If you have 3 scores, this loop will print 2 of them. So we're going to print the score array bracket I, and then we're going to add to that a comma and a space. And after that, we'll put a print line statement with the last score. Score array count. So I also need maybe a print line statement in the beginning, or system.out.println, the word scores. It'll print all the scores below it. And then we'll do one more print line statement with the word average. Maybe I'll just make this a print statement. Okay, that's what we'll do. We'll go print the scores, and then the last score will be a print line. And then this will be a print. Let's do a print formatting statement. average with a space, and then a percent. I want to do a fixed decimal. I want it to be a width of 2. So 1, how about 1F, comma average. Semicolon, and then after the point F, we want to put a new line character. So \n. Oh, oops. I put that in the wrong place. That average score should be below this guy. And also, this is not a print line. This is a print statement. Sorry. Put one space after the colon. So we're going to print the word scores with the space. Then we're going to, up to the last score, we're going to print the score with a comma and a space after it. And then everything up to the last score we won't print. And then in a print line statement, we'll print the last score. And then we'll print the average on a separate line after that. Okay, let's try it. And again, this took me a little longer than I expected, but that's okay. It's showing some of the subtleties in using an array, and this difference, slightly different than what we had in Python, that our list, we could just keep adding stuff to our list, and our list would just grow in size. Here, our list size is fixed, or the length is fixed at 5, so we have to kind of work around that with the idea of having a count to tell us how many things we've entered in the array, because the array length is fixed at 5. Okay, so we're just going to test it. I'll use 3 values. We'll go 72, 95, and 83, and then I'll enter in a negative number. With scores of 72, 95, and 0. So that 0 is wrong, and somehow my average printed out incorrectly here. So I might have done some copying and pasting strangely there. This should be count -1. So that 0 is the 0 that's coming in because I've got a 0 in the next element. So I went I less than count -1 here. So the last score is actually in index count -1. And then my average, I think the 83 is probably right. So let's run this again. Is that just coincidence? 97, 17. Let's just run it again, see what happens. Let's do it with the values that we're going to know, though. 80 and 84 and 86. So the average should be 84. No, I'm sorry. The average would be not 84. 250 divided by 3. Yeah, 83.3. Notice I wrote scores here again. So I don't want that word scores again. I only want that scores once. So that word scores should be out of this loop. So let me just do better spacing here in my output results. So everything above here is printing the scores, and then we're printing the average after that. This is where I meant do this manually, because I want to do these things by going through the loop. So let's go with the score of 80, and then 90, and then 95. We know the average should be 95. 88.3. 80, 90, 95. Why? Something's wrong with my averaging here. 80, 90. Let's just try 2. So let's try it with 2. Oh, 80, 90, and 95. Yes. Yeah, no, that's right. My math in my head is wrong. So this should have an average of 85. 80 and 90 has an average of 85. Okay, good. So my math in my head is wrong. The last example I meant to go 80, 90, and 85 would have an average of 85. Okay, it seems to be working. What's left for us to try to do here is to allow the array to increase in size. And so usually what we do there is we set it at a beginning size, and then if the user goes past that size, we kind of create a larger array and we copy over what we had, and then we double the size, or we double the size and add 1. So if you start with an array of 5, then the next array would, you double the 5 to be size 10, and you add 1 to be 11. I don't know why you add 1, but we just do. And then if they went up past 11, you would double the size to be 22, and you add 1 to be size 23, or length 23. And you just keep that pattern going. As they get too big, each time you just double it and add a 1. But we'll do that in the next video. And I'm going to scroll back through this code again, just so in case you need to catch part of it, you can. So if you want to stop here, you can. I'll just kind of scroll back through, hide the comments. There's main and get scores. Get scores calls get score singular. I'll scroll down. There's get score. Then we call calculate average. Maybe I put a return in here. And after calculate average, you can pause it if you need to. And then we call output results. Okay,